On the morning of October 9, 1856, beneath the darkened, wrought iron balconies of the Montgomery Cotton Exchange, a woman was sold for the staggering sum of 412,000 in today's currency. The auctioneer's hammer struck 23 times, each strike sinking into the air like the final note of a death march. When the sale concluded, the winning bidder vomited into a brass spittoon, his hands trembling as he signed the bill of sale. The crowd, stunned and silent, was left in disbelief. Not one newspaper dared report the transaction. No ledger remains to explain it. And the woman herself, she spoke not a single word through the entire ordeal. There she stood, on that auction block, her eyes locked on something no one else could see, her expression a twisted semblance of a smile, more like someone watching a trap spring shut at the exact moment they knew it would. Witnesses would later call it an unsettling smile. It wasn't joy, it wasn't despair, but something far deeper, more knowing. This sale shattered every record in Alabama's brutal history of human commerce. It outstripped the combined value of 3 working plantations. It represented more wealth than most men in that room could hope to amass in a lifetime. And yet, 6 different buyers fought with madness in their eyes, driving the price higher, defying all logic and reason. They didn't compete for her as they would a commodity. No, they fought for something else. Something that whispered of power far beyond money. What secret could justify such an impossible sum? What knowledge could turn a human being into the most valuable piece of property ever sold south of the Mason-Dixon line? And why, within 18 months, did 3 of the men who bid on her die under mysterious circumstances, while 2 others fled Alabama, abandoning everything, plantations, families, lives, as though chased by something more terrifying than debt or scandal? Before we dive deeper into the story Montgomery tried to bury, we need you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to The Sealed Room and activate that notification bell. These are the stories that powerful people have spent generations trying to erase from history. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share what you think this woman's impossible secret might have been. Together, we're building a community that refuses to let the truth stay buried. Now let's return to that fateful October morning. Montgomery in 1856 was a city intoxicated with cotton money, blind in its self-delusion of invincibility. The Alabama River carried paddle-wheelers loaded with bales, their destination textile mills in Manchester and Boston. The elegant homes along Dexter Avenue housed families who'd made their fortunes extracting wealth from Delta soil, a wealth built on the backs of people they legally owned but never truly controlled. The city of 28,000 residents divided itself into the usual categories: white and black, free and enslaved, powerful and powerless. But these divisions were always more fragile than the people would admit. The Cotton Exchange sat on Commerce Street, a Greek Revival building with towering columns that tried to evoke the grandeur of empires long gone, but mostly looked like a stage set for a play about power and empire. Inside, the auction floor could accommodate 200 men comfortably, and on busy days it did. Planters, speculators, merchant brokers, the usual crowd, traded everything from cotton futures to riverboat shares. Human lives, too, changed hands 3 days a week. Everything negotiable. Everything with a price. Everything reduced to numbers in leather. Bound ledgers that kept track of profit and loss, without a care for the moral bankruptcy that made such records possible. The auctioneer that morning, Silas Whitmore, was a man who'd seen it all. At 51 years old, his voice was as grating as gravel, but his reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary. He'd overseen more than 8,000 sales and took pride in his ability to read the room, to know when the bidders were close to reaching their limit, and to extract every last cent from them. His commission depended on the final price, and he had perfected the art of manufacturing competition. A well-timed pause, a strategically placed comment about another bidder's interest. These were his tools. He wielded them with surgical precision. The morning proceeded as expected until 30 a.m. when the side entrance opened and 3 men walked in, escorting a woman whose presence immediately shifted the air in the room. The chatter didn't stop, but it grew quieter, more cautious, as if every man present could sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. She was somewhere between 30 and 40 years old. though her face carried the unsettling ability to defy any fixed age. Her skin was the color of creek water coffee, and her features hinted at mixed ancestry, African, European, possibly Creek or Cherokee. She stood tall for a woman of any race at 5'7", her posture emanating a dignity that seemed out of place for her circumstances. She wore a simple gray dress, clean but worn, and her hair was pulled back in a style that only revealed her face, sharp, intelligent, and unsettling. But it wasn't her face that caused the first stir. It was her hands. They were stained with ink, the kind that accumulates from hours of writing. Her palms bore calluses, not from field labor or domestic work, but from writing, something enslaved people were forbidden to learn in Alabama. For a moment, the room fell into a stunned silence. Enslaved people were not allowed to read or write. And while some owners secretly defied this, no one ever allowed their property to develop the kind of extensive calluses this woman had. Silas Whitmore descended from his platform, his usual confidence slipping, replaced with genuine uncertainty. He spoke briefly with the men escorting her, examining the documents they had produced. His face flickered through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, something akin to fear. When he returned to his platform, he held a sealed envelope in his left hand, his right hand trembling as he raised it to call for attention. "Gentlemen," Whitmore began, his voice lacking its usual strength, "we have before us today a lot that requires special introduction. The woman before you has been designated property number 47, no name. Estimated age 35 years. No documented history of fieldwork, house service, or any conventional skilled trade." A voice from the crowd called out, "Then what's she worth?" "Whitmore, don't waste our time." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "The opening bid has been established at 8,000. Silence. Absolute silence. 8,000. That was more than most skilled craftsmen could earn in a decade. It could buy 2 experienced carriage drivers or enough field hands for 100 acres of cotton. For a woman with no skills, the price was outrageous. But Whitmore didn't lower the price. Instead, he did something no one in the room had ever seen before. He broke the seal on the envelope and began reading aloud, his voice growing softer with each sentence, as though he hoped the impact of his words would lessen with his whisper. The seller provides the following sworn statement, executed before Judge Harrison Mitchell of Montgomery County, on October 4th of this year. The property designated number 47 possesses knowledge of significant value to parties concerned with financial transactions, property ownership, and matters of personal reputation. Said knowledge has been verified through demonstration to 5 confidential witnesses. The purchaser will receive, along with standard documentation of sale, a private letter explaining the nature and extent of this knowledge along with recommendations for its proper utilization. The room's confusion quickly morphed into something far darker. Men began shouting questions. What knowledge? What demonstration? What's in the letter? Whitmore raised his hand for silence and continued reading. The words that followed would be whispered about in Montgomery parlors for years to come, always in voices too low for servants to overhear. The seller states that the property in question possesses complete and perfect recall of every document, letter, contract, promissory note, deed, will, and financial record she has ever observed. Her memory operates with precision equivalent to photographic reproduction. She can recite word for word, page by page, any text she has seen, regardless of complexity or length. She can reproduce numerical calculations, account balances, and transaction details years after initial observation. This capacity has been tested extensively and found to be without error or limitation. A heavy silence settled over the room, and every man there understood what Whitmore had just revealed. In an economy built on paper promises, credit, deeds, wills, and contracts, a person with perfect memory was worth more than gold. She was more valuable than any cotton, more powerful than any land. She could rewrite history, change debts, and erase mistakes. But no one had yet understood the full depth of the power she held. The bidding war was only just beginning. The seller, with a steady hand, continued, her voice unwavering as she detailed the life of the woman standing on display. For years, she had served in numerous households across Montgomery and its surrounding counties. Always present during the preparation, review, and storage of confidential documents. These weren't just any papers. These were the keys to secrets, some of which could topple families, destroy reputations, and rewrite history itself. From account books to private letters, financial agreements to deeds, she had been there observing, memorizing, absorbing it all. Her silence in the face of this revelation spoke volumes, and the auction floor, once brimming with the murmurs of eager bidders, fell into chaos. The air was thick with a palpable fear, a hunger and a desperation. Men shouted in anger, some shaking with fear, others with an unsettling excitement as they realized what they were bidding on. A woman, yes, but not just any woman. She held within her the power to undo everything they had built. Silas Whitmore, the auctioneer, raised a hand, calling for silence. The property will cooperate fully with her legal owner, providing any information requested in complete and accurate detail, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. She has been conditioned to understand that her well-being depends entirely on her usefulness and discretion. The seller guarantees the accuracy of all information. She provides and accepts no responsibility for consequences arising from her owner's use of such information. The opening bid is 8,000. Do I hear 80,000? For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the room, a hand rose. James Delocroix, a cotton factor with extensive operations spanning 4 counties. 8,000, he declared, his voice calm but firm. 9,000, came the swift reply from Thomas Sheridan, a powerful merchant banker, whose loans supported half the plantations in the Black Belt. What followed next was a bidding frenzy, unlike any Silas Whitmore had ever witnessed. The stakes weren't just financial now, they were personal. Each bid seemed to escalate the tension, the fear, and the greed in the room. 10,000, or 12,000, or 15,000. The men who had come to buy field hands found themselves competing for something far more dangerous. This woman, this walking archive of secrets, held the keys to untold power. Power that could ruin entire families, bankrupt those who had thought themselves untouchable, and shatter the foundations of a region built on lies and deceit. At 18,000, only 5 bidders remained, and the crowd split. Some were still in the game, their faces strained as they weighed the risk. Could they afford this? Was the price worth the blackmail she could provide? The others, their expressions dark with realization, understood that whoever won would hold the power to destroy everything in Montgomery, armed with knowledge that could be used as a weapon in 1,000 ways. 20,000, a voice called from the side of the room. The man stood partially obscured by the brim of a planter's hat, his clothing suggesting wealth, but offering no clue to his identity. His tone was one of finality, an unspoken confidence that no one would dare challenge him. The remaining 4 bidders glanced at one another, their faces flickering with a mix of relief, fear, and hesitation. One by one, they lowered their hands, their mental calculations clear. No amount of blackmail was worth financial suicide. The hammer fell. Sold to the gentleman against the wall for 20,000. Please come forward to complete the transaction. The crowd parted as the winner moved toward the stage. He walked with an eerie calm, deliberate steps that commanded attention. Up close, he was in his late 40s, his face weathered by years spent outdoors, yet his hands, soft and unblemished, betrayed his wealth. His clothes, understated but expensive, were the hallmark of a man who cultivated anonymity, a man who didn't want to be remembered. The transaction took 90 minutes, painfully slow, deliberate. Bank drafts were verified, ownership papers prepared in duplicate, witnesses secured to finalize every detail, ensuring everything was legal under Alabama law. Throughout this, the woman, property number 47, stood motionless, her expression unreadable, her eyes locked on some distant point beyond the crowd. Men tried to speak with her, to glean any information she might hold, but she remained silent, unyielding. She didn't acknowledge them, not even with a glance. Her stillness was unnatural, unsettling, like something more than human. When all the paperwork was finalized, the buyer produced a key and unlocked the iron cuffs around her wrists. The metal clattered to the floor, leaving deep red marks on her skin. She didn't even flinch. He handed her a folded shawl, which she draped over her shoulders with practiced ease. Without a word, he gestured to the side door, and she followed, walking beside him with unwavering calm. Together, they disappeared into the crisp October morning, leaving behind a crowd that would debate the significance of what they had just witnessed for hours, maybe days. 3 days later, whispers began to circulate throughout Montgomery's commercial district. Men were desperate to know who the buyer was, where he had taken the woman, and what he planned to do with the treasure trove of knowledge she possessed. The bank that had verified his drafts confirmed only that the funds were legitimate, drawn from an account registered to a timber company in northern Alabama. But that was where the trail went cold. The company's listed address corresponded to a lumber mill that had been closed for 2 years. The name on the account, Marcus Webb, appeared on no tax rolls, no property deeds, no business records anywhere in Alabama. The 5 witnesses mentioned in the seller's statement had vanished without a trace. But the most disturbing thing of all was what came to light about the woman herself. Delilah, was that even her real name? Had been passed from one household to the next. A pattern common among enslaved people, but there was something about her that set her apart. Delilah had spent time in the home of Montgomery's most prominent attorney, where she was present during confidential meetings and document preparation. She had belonged to a cotton factor who kept detailed records of credit extended to dozens of planters. She had worked in the office of a judge whose personal library contained property deeds that could affect land claims for thousands of acres. In each of these households, Delilah was valued not for her labor, but for something far more dangerous, her silence. People believed she was illiterate, but they were wrong. Delilah had taught herself to read. She could read the documents left carelessly within reach. And what she had learned, she never forgot. Her memory was flawless. She could recall entire books of account, contracts, letters, every word, every number, every detail. And that's when the real nightmare began. The plantation owner who had first discovered her ability, Richard Thornhill, knew what he had. He kept her secret at first, using her selectively, consulting her for business advantages. But soon the paranoia began. Thornhill was afraid of what people might learn about Delilah. He became obsessed with protecting her, locking her away when visitors came to the plantation, firing overseers, and hiding her abilities at all costs. In August of 1855, Thornhill made a fatal mistake. He tried to rent out her memory for profit, offering access to her vast knowledge. He thought it would protect him, spread the risk around. But it did the opposite. Once word of Delilah's capabilities got out, it wasn't just about renting her anymore. Every powerful man in Alabama wanted her, and if they couldn't own her, they might just decide to eliminate her. Delilah had become the most dangerous weapon in Montgomery, and everyone wanted to wield her. They wanted to own her. Completely. To control her knowledge, absolutely. They needed to prevent anyone else from using her memory against them. Within weeks, Thornhill began receiving offers to purchase Delilah, some cloaked and veiled threats that left no room for refusal. His plantation was burglarized twice in September. A suspicious fire gutted his cotton warehouse in October. And in November, someone fired a shot at him from the tree line while he rode across his property. The bullet passing so close that he felt the wind of its passage. Like a whisper of death, Richard Thornhill broke under the pressure. In December of 1855, he sold Delilah to an intermediary for $12,000, a fortune that should have marked triumph. But in truth, it felt like the desperate escape from a trap of his own making. He left Alabama with his wife and children, moving to Kentucky within the month, where he purchased a small tobacco farm, hiding under an assumed name until his death from pneumonia in 1862. He never spoke of Delilah, nor what he'd learned about her capabilities, and his family remained silent even after emancipation made such revelations legally safe. The man who bought Delilah was Samuel Crawford, an attorney who specialized in discreet services for the wealthy, protecting their reputations when scandals threatened. Crawford immediately understood what Delilah was, something unprecedented. Not a mere piece of property, but a treasure trove of information. Her value wasn't in labor, it was in the secrets she held. Secrets so dangerous they could bring down entire families, businesses, and empires. Crawford consulted for months, trying to figure out how to maximize her worth, while mitigating the risks her knowledge posed. His decision was catastrophic. Rather than selling Delilah to a single buyer who would monopolize her knowledge, he chose to auction her publicly. Crawford believed that by creating competition, the price would skyrocket to unprecedented levels. But the auction wasn't just about wealth, it was a demonstration of power. A warning to all that secrets existed, that no document was safe, and that those with the power to control knowledge controlled everything. The auction would change everything. What Crawford failed to foresee was that some secrets are too volatile to be sold. And once everyone knew what Delilah held, once they understood the true power of perfect memory, she would become far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The men competing for her weren't bidding to gain her knowledge. They were bidding to prevent others from wielding a weapon capable of destroying them. The man who won the auction was Marcus Webb. He purchased Delilah for 20 zalozen, a sum that might have seemed astronomical to most, but Webb wasn't an ordinary man. He wasn't the timber company owner he claimed to be. He didn't even have a business in northern Alabama. He was something far more dangerous, a blackmailer. Someone who had spent years cultivating a vast network of informants across the South, collecting secrets like treasures. Delilah was exactly what he'd been searching for. Webb understood immediately what the auction represented. It wasn't just a sale of an unusually valuable piece of property. It was the revelation of something far more profound, perfect memory, a human archive walking among them. Webb realized that the very existence of Delilah posed a threat to every powerful man in the room. Secrets could no longer be hidden if they were stored in a mind that could recall them flawlessly. Delilah wasn't just a commodity. She was a weapon, one that had to be controlled or destroyed. Webb's purchase wasn't an investment. It was a rescue mission, though whether he intended to rescue Delilah or merely to control the secrets she held was still unclear. Within hours of the auction's conclusion, he had taken Delilah from Montgomery. They traveled swiftly by hired carriage, heading north toward the Tennessee border, with Webb moving fast enough to stay ahead of anyone who might be following them. Webb had already arranged a temporary refuge, a farmhouse in Limestone County, owned by an associate who asked no questions and kept no records. They arrived after dark on October 10th. Webb spoke little during the journey, and Delilah sat across from him in the carriage, still eerily composed, her eyes betraying no emotion. But once inside the farmhouse, with lamps lit and the door secured, Webb finally addressed her directly. "You understand what's about to happen," he said, his tone firm as if stating a fact. Delilah looked at him, her eyes unwavering. There was no fear, no hope, just cold, calculated stillness. She nodded once. "The men who bid against me won't accept this outcome," Webb continued. "Some of them carry secrets you've memorized. They won't let you exist as someone else's property. They'll come for you. Some will offer money. Some will offer threats. Some will simply try to kill you and anyone protecting you. You've become the most dangerous person in Alabama." Delilah's voice broke the silence for the first time since the auction, quiet but perfect in its clarity. "I've always been the most dangerous person in Alabama. They just didn't know it until today." Webb froze. His assumptions about Delilah began to shift. He thought she was a victim, trapped by her abilities, doomed to a life controlled by others. But now he saw something different in her. She was not a victim of circumstance. Her choice to be sold, to make her knowledge public, was deliberate. "You wanted this," Webb said slowly, piecing it together. "You wanted to be sold publicly. You wanted everyone to know what you could do." Delilah smiled then. It was the same smile that had disturbed onlookers at the auction, something that looked like satisfaction, but felt more like watching a blade slide between ribs. "Knowledge requires payment," she said. "For 15 years they've been extracting value from me, using my memory to resolve disputes, settle debts, confirm property claims. They treated me like a tool, something to be used when convenient and forgotten when not. So I decided to show them exactly what I am. Not a tool, a weapon. And now they'll pay the price for every secret I've collected." Webb felt a chill settle in his chest. "What price?" Delilah walked to the window, her back to him now. As she peered out into the dark, her gaze sharp, calculating. "They think owning me gives them control over the secrets I hold. But information doesn't work that way. Once people know secrets can be remembered perfectly, once they understand that no private document stays private if the wrong person observes it, trust becomes impossible. How does a planter negotiate with his factor if he knows their conversation might be recorded in someone's flawless memory? How does a banker extend credit if he worries his account books might be memorized by a servant present in the room? How do any of them continue operating in a world where privacy is an illusion? She turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. I'm not a weapon you can point at your enemies. I'm a weapon that's already detonated. The damage is done. The auction did what I needed it to do. Now we just watch while everything collapses. Webb had underestimated her. Over the next weeks, he learned that Delilah's words were not just talk. The aftermath of the auction reverberated through Montgomery's commercial elite like cracks spreading through glass. Men who had lost the auction demanded investigations into what secrets she might possess about their business rivals. Those who hadn't bid started questioning what information she held about them, what documents she had observed. Paranoia spread like wildfire. 3 weeks after the auction, James Deliqua, the cotton factor who had bid $8,000, was found dead in his office. The coroner ruled it suicide, but friends who read his farewell letter noticed something off. His handwriting was shaky, as if written under duress. His account books, containing records of credit extended to planters, were gone. In November, Thomas Sheridan, the banker who had bid $9,000, fled Montgomery in the dead of night, leaving his family behind. His bank discovered embezzlement, but the evidence seemed too perfectly arranged, as if someone had orchestrated his fall. The third death came in December. William Crane, the planter who had bid $12,000, died in a mysterious carriage accident on a familiar road. The road had been sabotaged, but no one could figure out why or who was behind it. Crane's widow found a letter among his effects describing his belief that he was being hunted by someone who knew too much. He never finished the letter, but the most disturbing part of all was what didn't happen. Marcus Webb and Delilah vanished without a trace. No one could find them. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and a growing conviction that the auction had unleashed something beyond control. Rumors flooded Montgomery, each one more far-fetched than the last. Some said Webb had taken Delilah to Washington, selling her secrets to politicians. Others believed he killed her to silence the threat. Still others suggested Delilah had murdered Webb and disappeared into the northern black communities, using her knowledge to hide in plain sight. The truth came years later, and it was far more disturbing than any of the rumors. Delilah had played a longer game than anyone realized. The auction had been just one move in a strategy that spanned decades, and the price she had demanded for her knowledge, well, it was far higher than $20,000. In 1864, during the chaos of Sherman's march toward Atlanta, Delilah appeared before a Union officer named Colonel Benjamin Hastings. She carried papers that identified her as a free person, though they seemed suspiciously perfect forgeries. She claimed to possess information vital to Union intelligence. She could remember every conversation she had overheard while working in Montgomery. Details about Confederate troop movements, financial arrangements, secret deals with European bankers. She was able to reproduce these conversations verbatim. Skeptical, Hastings tested her by showing her a captured Confederate dispatch. She recited it perfectly, including troop positions and supply requisitions, without a single mistake. The intelligence Delilah provided helped the Union Navy intercept critical Confederate shipments and exposed weaknesses that helped shorten the war by months, saving countless lives. And she did it all without emotion, her face as cold as it had been when she stood on the auction block, revealing the devastating price of the knowledge she had kept for so long. When the war ended, Delilah disappeared again. Some say she used her newfound wealth to buy her freedom and start a new life. Others say she traveled north, hiding in the free black communities where her secrets remained buried. But the truth, when it finally emerged, was more than anyone could have ever imagined. Her memory remained sharp, and she spoke with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime weighing her words. Understanding that speaking truth as a black woman in Alabama carried risks that never entirely disappeared, regardless of what laws claimed. Delilah wasn't her real name, Sarah explained. Her mother named her diner after someone in the Bible, but owners kept changing it depending on what they thought sounded appropriate. She stopped caring what they called her after a while. She said names were just another thing white people took from you, so why get attached to anything you couldn't keep? Holloway asked how Delilah had learned to read, where she had acquired the education that made her memory so dangerous. Sarah's expression grew cautious, but after a moment, she continued. There was a white woman in Montgomery, a Quaker from Pennsylvania, who married a merchant here. She believed slavery was evil, and she did something about it, even though it was illegal. She taught reading to enslaved people secretly, usually at night, in the back room of a shop her husband owned. Delilah went to those lessons for nearly 2 years, starting when she was maybe 13 or 14. She learned to read, learned to write, learned arithmetic, geography, and history. The Quaker woman said Delilah was the most brilliant student she'd ever taught, white or black. Said her memory was like nothing she'd encountered, that Delilah could read something once and recite it perfectly weeks later. What happened to the Quaker woman? Holloway asked. Sarah's face hardened. Someone informed on her in 1843. She was arrested, tried for violating Alabama's education laws, and sentenced to 6 months in jail. Her husband divorced her while she was imprisoned, took their children north, and never came back. She died of fever in that jail 3 weeks before her sentence would have ended. They buried her in the poor cemetery outside town, didn't even mark the grave properly. But before she died, she got a message to Delilah. Told her to use what she'd learned to make the knowledge worth something, to make them pay for what they'd stolen. And Delilah did, Holloway said quietly. Sarah nodded. Oh yes, Delilah did exactly that. She spent the next 13 years positioning herself, getting sold to specific households, making herself useful enough that owners would keep her around, but forgettable enough that they'd discuss private matters in her presence. She memorized everything, every document, every conversation, every secret that people believed was safe, because they'd never considered that an enslaved woman might be listening, understanding, and remembering with perfect accuracy. But she didn't use that knowledge immediately. She waited, built up her archive year after year, letting people become comfortable with her presence, collecting more and more information, until she possessed enough secrets to destroy dozens of prominent families simultaneously. And then she arranged her own auction, worked with that lawyer Crawford, to make sure everyone understood exactly what was being sold. Sarah continued. She wanted them terrified. She wanted them to understand that their privacy had been an illusion, that every assumption they made about enslaved people being ignorant or incapable was a lie they told themselves to sleep at night. Holloway leaned forward, her academic training momentarily overwhelmed by the implications of what she was hearing. The auction was deliberate. She planned to be sold that way. Sarah smiled grimly. Delilah planned everything. She knew the auction would cause chaos, that men would panic, that some would die and others would flee. She knew that trust between planters and factors, and between bankers and clients, would collapse once everyone understood that perfect memory existed. And she knew the war was coming, even if most white people were too blind to see it. She positioned herself to be valuable to whichever side won. And when the Union needed intelligence, there she was with exactly the information they required. The greatest revenge, Sarah continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, wasn't what she did during the war. It was what she did after. When Delilah finally became free, truly legally free, she started writing letters, sent them to families across Alabama, people whose secrets she'd memorized years earlier. The letters were polite, carefully worded, but the message was clear. She remembered everything. She could prove debts that had been conveniently forgotten, property transfers that had never been properly recorded, agreements that violated laws if they became public. She didn't ask for money explicitly. Sarah went on. She just reminded them that she existed, that her memory existed, and that memory doesn't die just because the war ended. Some families paid her. Holloway said, understanding dawning. Sarah nodded. Oh yes, paid her regular amounts, quarterly or yearly, purchasing silence about things their grandfathers and fathers had done. Not all of them. Some refused. Thought they could ignore a black woman's claims regardless of what she knew. Those families tended to have unfortunate things happen. Property deeds that got challenged successfully in court. Business partnerships that fell apart when old disputes resurfaced with perfect documentation. Reputations that crumbled when letters appeared in newspapers describing transactions people had sworn never occurred. Delilah lived well in her later years. Very well by anyone's standards. She owned property in 3 different cities, dressed in clothes that would have been appropriate for a wealthy white woman, traveled wherever she pleased. Some people whispered she was being supported by a patron, some white man who'd taken her as a mistress. But anyone who knew her understood the truth. She was supporting herself through the careful exploitation of knowledge she'd accumulated across decades of being treated as furniture, while people discussed matters they believed no one would remember. If you're finding this story as powerful as we are, do us a favor, Sarah said, her voice catching. Hit that like button to help others discover Delilah's truth, and leave a comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in her position? How should we remember people who use the only weapons available to them in a system designed to keep them powerless? Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. Margaret Holloway tried to locate Delilah after her conversation with Sarah Mitchell. She sent letters to addresses in Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, where records suggested a woman matching Delilah's description might have lived. None of the letters received responses. She examined property records, bank accounts, business registrations, searching for any trace of the woman who had sold for $20,000 and then vanished into freedom with enough secrets to sustain her for a lifetime. The search produced only fragments, hints of presence without confirmation. A property deed in Philadelphia registered to a diner web in 1872. A bank account in Boston belonging to someone with the initials D.W. who made regular deposits from 1868 through 1889. A mention in a newspaper society column from 1885 describing a well-dressed colored woman who attended an abolitionist meeting and contributed generously when donations were requested. But Holloway never found Delilah herself, and eventually she abandoned the search. In her private journal, she wrote that perhaps Delilah's greatest triumph was her disappearance, the way she became impossible to track once she gained control over her own story. For 15 years, people had watched her, monitored her movements, treated her presence as something they owned. Once free, she made herself invisible, except when she chose revelation, appearing only to deliver reminders that memory persists, and debts eventually come due, regardless of what legal structures claim to erase them. The last confirmed reference to Delilah appears in an 1897 letter discovered in the archives of the Freedmen's Bureau. The letter, unsigned but written in elegant handwriting that analysis suggests belonged to an educated woman of advanced age, describes the experience of being sold at auction and the strategies necessary for survival when you possess knowledge that others fear. The writer never identifies herself by name, but several details match what is known about Delilah's life with precision, suggesting either she wrote this letter herself or someone very familiar with her story composed it on her behalf. The letter's final paragraph contains words that have been quoted in dozens of historical studies since its discovery, because they capture something essential about resistance and memory, and the long arc of justice that often moves too slowly for those trapped in its machinery. They believed they owned me, the letter states. They believed that purchasing my body gave them rights to what my mind contained. But memory cannot be owned. Knowledge cannot be chained. I carried their secrets through decades of bondage, and when freedom finally came, those secrets became currency. I spent deliberately, carefully extracting payment for every humiliation, every moment of being treated as less than human. Some call this revenge. I call it accounting. They kept ledgers tracking what they stole from me and millions like me. I simply kept better records, and I collected the debt they insisted didn't exist. Whether Delilah wrote these words or someone else did, they represent a truth that extends far beyond one woman's extraordinary memory. Throughout the history of American slavery, enslaved people accumulated knowledge about their owners' families, their owners' business dealings, and personal failings. They observed everything while being treated as though they observed nothing. They understood conversations conducted in their presence as though their comprehension didn't matter. And sometimes, rarely but powerfully, they used that knowledge to create space for resistance, to extract small victories from impossible circumstances, to demonstrate that the system designed to crush them contained weaknesses that careful observation could exploit. Delilah's story represents an extreme example of this dynamic because her memory operated at a level that seems almost supernatural. But the principle she embodied exists throughout the historical record, visible in countless smaller moments where enslaved people leveraged information to protect themselves, to help others, to create cracks in structures that appeared unbreakable. Knowledge was one of the few resources that couldn't be entirely controlled, one of the few forms of power that surveillance couldn't eliminate, because you can watch a person without ever knowing what they understand about what they're seeing. The auction on October 9, 1856, was ultimately about this uncomfortable truth. When Montgomery's elite gathered to bid on property number 47, they weren't just purchasing one unusually valuable enslaved woman. They were confronting the revelation that their power had always been more fragile than they believed, that the people they owned had been watching them just as carefully as they watched those they enslaved, and that memory could be a weapon that waited years or decades before being deployed with devastating effect. 3 of the men who bid on Delilah died within 18 months. 2 fled Alabama forever. The survivors spent the rest of their lives wondering what she remembered about them, what secrets she might hold, and what price she might eventually demand. The auction destroyed trust between planters and factors, between bankers and clients, between anyone whose business depended on confidentiality and anyone who might have observed their confidential dealings. The economic disruption this caused contributed to Alabama's vulnerability when war came, because credit networks had already been damaged by paranoia about who knew what and who might reveal it. And Delilah walked away free eventually, carrying an archive of secrets that sustained her for the rest of her life, extracting payment from people who insisted they owed nothing, demonstrating that knowledge does indeed require payment beyond gold, and the debt compounds with interest until someone finally settles the account. Here at the Sealed Room, we excavate stories like Delilah's because they force us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, memory, and resistance. They reveal that the people history tried to erase were often the ones watching most carefully, remembering most accurately, and waiting most patiently for the moment when their knowledge could be transformed into something more powerful than any auction price could represent. The Montgomery Cotton Exchange building, where Delilah stood on that October morning, was demolished in 1931 to make way for a department store. No historical marker commemorates what occurred there. No monument acknowledges the woman who sold for more than any enslaved person in Alabama history. The auction records, if they still exist, remain buried in courthouse archives that few researchers bother to examine. But memory persists even when monuments don't. Stories survive even when official history tries to bury them. And sometimes, if you listen carefully to the silences in historical records, to the gaps where someone removed pages from ledgers or sealed documents that might prove too revealing, you can hear echoes of people like Delilah, who refused to let their knowledge be stolen, without eventually collecting payment. She told them from the beginning, knowledge requires payment beyond gold. They just didn't understand that she wasn't explaining what they would pay to acquire her knowledge. She was explaining what they would pay for having stolen it in the first place, and that bill came due eventually with interest, collected by the woman they believed they owned, but who spent every moment of her bondage preparing for the accounting that would come when freedom made collection possible.